Hi guys, so today I'm going to do a video on the differences between sort of the NARD 26 and the PAS 40 and whether the criticism of the PAS 40 by certain groups of drummers or generations of drummers is really warranted, or if some of that criticism is overblown or based on myths or false truths or half-truths. Are those extra 14 as legitimate as the original I say in quotes, 26 rudiments? So this comes from an article that I wrote that I intended to send to magazines to publish, but I've had 2 magazines tell me they would publish my articles and lessons, and neither one has ever followed through. So I'm still waiting to see 2 different sort of print lessons come out, and I don't think it's going to happen. So for many years there's been a tension in the drumming community over how many standard educational rudiments there ought to be. The Percussive Arts Society says 40, PAS, and then the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, NARD, says 26. The 14 extra rudiments on the PAS list have been contentious since their publication, which was in 1984. It's basically some drummers either lash out against them and sort of rail against them actively, and other people have basically just ignored them for 35 years. And you'd think that after more than 3 decades the controversy would sort of settle down, but I hear drummers of different ages and different backgrounds arguing over this constantly. Jack Pratt has an association called the International Association of Traditional Drummers, called the IATD, right, for short. And they have denounced the PAS rudiments for several years based on the fact that they think the extra 14 have too much Swiss influence and that they're a departure from traditional drumming. And he defines traditional as in like the ancient fife and drum tradition of America specifically. So the IATD rhetoric, if you look at their website, is surprisingly nationalist for American rudimental drumming. Even though it has international right in the name, it's not really international. Their biggest problem with any rudiment that's not in the 26 is its supposed foreignness or lack of traditional American inclusion. So it's not really international. They're very American, and they're not really shy about saying it except in the name. It's hard to argue with Jack Pratt. He's a titan of the industry, but 7 out of those 14, it's definitely not true that they're Swiss or that they're more Swiss than American somehow, and it's not true that they're non-traditional. So I'm going to try to make a case that these are falsehoods and that at least 7 of the extra 14 are super legit according to Jack Pratt and his association, and are just as good really as the other 26. So there's some history that you got to know to understand what are the 26. The 26 came out in 1933, and they are exactly Gardner Strube's 25 lessons from 1870 in his book Drum and Fife Instructor. And they're in a different order, and the NARD guys added 1 rudiment, the single stroke roll. Now Strube is known for creating the name of the lesson 25. It's the 25th of his 25 lessons. But really he did that incidentally by not naming it, and people just started calling it that. It had a name before. He didn't invent the rudiment. He just didn't use the old name, and people started calling it lesson 25, which, that's cool for him. Basically, before Strube, from 1870 on back, there were a ton of rudimental manuals, and they listed between 13 and 40 rudiments. And so basically, his 25 are dead center in the middle, give or take 2, between 13 and 40, so like they're the average number. They're also sort of the average complexity. Ashworth had a rudiment called Not So Quick, which is literally just not playing quickly. That's not really a rudiment. Also, like Hart had one called the Open Double and Single Flam Drag Beat, which I have a video on as well. And it's a really ridiculously complicated name, at least. So he was sort of middling complexity and of average number of rudiments that he prescribed to learn. All his rudiments, except for 1, had existed before. He did make up, as far as I can tell, the drag paradiddle number 2. I've looked at a ton of manuals going back as far as the 1700s. I've never seen it before. And then he puts it into his 25, and then it just sort of continues to be a thing after that. So Strube's manual was published just a couple years after the Civil War ended. I think it ended in 65. He published it, or he probably wrote it in like 68, 69, something like that. And so when the NARD guys were looking for rudiments to put in their official 26, they probably thought that his book was a good average of Civil War publications. Like it had a little bit of hindsight 2020 kind of thing. And Sanford Moeller says in his book, actually, from the 20s, right before NARD got together, that he thought the Civil War was like the high point of ancient drumming in America. And you'd think that NARD probably also agreed and then would want something from roughly around the Civil War era anyway. So I've looked at 5 manuals from this exactly in the Civil War, 1861 to 1864. So they were published, just after it broke out, and then up until, almost the end, they were still producing new manuals for the military, and all these are for the Union Army, I'm pretty sure. One of them, Keach, Burditt, and Cassidy, they give you 18 rudiments, which is a little bit shy of probably what you need. But then just the next year later, H.C. Hart gives you 40, right? The highest number that's sort of ever been published before that time. Then there's a dude named Elias Howe who basically took like a shotgun approach, and also in 1862, or I think it was 1861, his United States Regulation Drum and Fife Instructor, he gives 21 of his own rudiments, then 22 that he just ripped straight out of Alvin Robinson's book in 1818, Martial Music. Then he reprints Kleinhans's 1853 list of 30 from the book Manual of Instruction for Drummers. And so when you add that up, it sounds like there were like 73 in there. There weren't really, because a lot of them overlapped. There's just like 3 completely separate lists in that book. And on a side note, Kleinhans's rudiments were like almost exactly Ashworth's rudiments from 1812. He just made a couple subtle alterations. But then you can tell that Howe calls Kleinhans's rudiments the old style used in 1812, or the Old English style. So he's sort of giving a nod back to Ashworth, like, yeah, I see what you did there. Between the different 1800s, 1860s publications, you had a whole bunch of crazy naming conventions in Hart. You had a scattered collection of everything from Howe. You had Nevins, who basically also just republished Ashworth. Keach and his buddies sort of had not enough rudiments, you could say. And then there's one by Bruce and Emmett, which modern sources say was not exactly really what they did in the Civil War. It was a little bit unreliable. So in comparison, Strube's like neat 25 lessons look uniform, authoritative, and concise. So and you'd think with hindsight and not having a war actually raging, he had some time to think about it. And he probably would have had the most concise, normal, logical rudiments. So that's what NARD went with, and they just added their one. So that's reasonable, but it doesn't mean it's the perfect set of rudiments either. So Strube discards all kinds of rudiments, like there were 40 in Hart just a couple years earlier. He just gets rid of a whole bunch, doesn't think they're necessary. And some of those exercises that he threw out, didn't put in his book, they actually come back in the PAS rudiments in 1984. So in 1984, they compiled, the same 26 that are in NARD, and then they added 14 more. The ones they added can be split into 2 categories. Those that existed before 1870 that were traditional American rudiments, and then there are 7 of those, and then there are 7 that did not exist, as far as I can tell, before the 1800s. Like, they were either invented later, or they were European and brought over, or they're just sort of logical extensions of rudiments that already exist, but they're not necessarily traditional American. So for those 7, Jack Pratt might have an argument, at least a little bit. When you think of what is a traditional American rudiment, I think that if it's been in American manuals for more than 150 years, that it should qualify as traditionally American. All rudiments are basically either Swiss or French, at least the ones that we use, if you go back far enough in history. So if they've been in America for more than a century or a century and a half, I'd say that's enough to get them into being American and not being foreign. They shouldn't really be considered Swiss rudiments at that point. So that's what I'm going to go off of. So the 7 rudiments that I say are traditional American and not really Swiss, is because they've been at least 150 years of American usage. The pre-1870 PAS rudiments that were not part of the 26 are the single stroke 4, the single stroke 7, the 6-stroke roll, the patafla-fla, the Swiss Army triplet, and the inverted flam tab. These are the ones that I really think that even the most traditional American ancient drummer should accept as good as the 26. Now, the last 3 are cited as being the most foreign, and obviously the first one of that would be the Swiss Army triplet. It has Swiss in the name, so you can see where people are getting this from. The Swiss Army triplet has existed in American manuals since 1818 with Robinson's book, Martial Music. So it's not new by any means, and it's not really Swiss because, like I said, it's been American for, at this point, almost 200 years. actually 201 years. So what he calls it is a flam and a 2, and the sticking is the same. He just doesn't call it a Swiss Army triplet, obviously. So the problem with PAS might be that they called it Swiss Army, not that it was, the pattern was exactly Swiss. The next one that becomes up, people call it foreign, is the patafla-fla because it has a really French sounding name. A lot of the French rudiments sound like that. In fact, there is a lay patafla-fla in French military drumming, and it's very similar. However, Robinson in Massachusetts in the 1800s also had flam and a 2 and a flam in that same book that we just talked about. So flam, 2 strokes, 1 flam, that sounds like a patafla-fla. Same thing. And the last one that people say is really foreign is the inverted flam tap, because there is a Swiss tap flam that is like the same sticking, right? However, Charles Stewart Ashworth, 1812, New and Useful Complete System of Drum Beating, it's a great name, had the exact same thing. He had what he called a stroke and flam, which is an inverted flam tap. It's the same rudiment. Basically, to round out the other rudiments on the list, the single stroke 4 is just a non-appoggiatura version of a 4-stroke Ruff. Same sticking, exactly everything. And that's been in American since before we were a country. Single stroke 7 comes up in 1862 called the triple compound drag beat, which on the surface doesn't sound like a single stroke 7, but it is. And then the 6-stroke roll was in Rumrill and Holton's book, Drummer's Instructor or Martial Musician in 1817, so that's pretty old too. Again, we're looking at 200 years plus. Now the post-1870 editions were the multiple bounce roll, the triple stroke roll, the 17-stroke roll, the triple paradiddle, and the single paradiddle diddle. Oh, and the flam drag and the single dragadiddle, right? That's 7. So these can be split into 2 further groups. Logical extensions of what rudiments we already had, and hybrid rudiments. So 5 of them are like logical, you know, oh, it makes sense, let's do this. And the other 2 are like straight up hybrids. They're like 2 rudiments jammed together. Multiple bounce roll is a staple of orchestral playing. It sort of makes sense that it's a rudiment, although it's not a traditionally rudimental skill. The triple paradiddle is just a double with an extra 2 singles in the front. Single paradiddle diddle is the flam paradiddle diddle, which has always been a thing without the flam. And then the triple stroke roll, it's like a double stroke roll, but triple is just longer. And then the 17-stroke roll, which has been a thing in Europe forever. Charlie Wilcoxon was using it in the 40s. So it's not like new, but it's not as old as the 1870s. American military drummers weren't really playing the 17-stroke roll back then. So basically, you're either taking a concept and you're making it longer, or in that one case of the paradiddle diddle, you're just taking a flam away. And so they're not crazy things, but they're not traditional per se. Now the other 2, basically the flam drag and the dragadiddle, are other rudiments that have been jammed together. And this makes sense because in 1984, DCI had been around for a decade or so, and they'd been starting to develop hybrid rudiments, so it was sort of timely to start sticking them into the standard sheet. You can argue if that's necessary or whatever at your leisure, but that's what they did. When you look at it on the surface, the PAS guys added 14 rudiments to a system that had been in place for 51 years, which in turn was based off a set of rudiments from 63 years before that. So it sounds sacrilegious when you phrase it like, oh yeah, they did a massive upheaval to a 114-year-old system of rudiments. But that's not really what they did. I think the criticism is completely unwarranted, and let's not forget that Strube completely invented the drag paradiddle number 2. That wasn't super traditional. He just decided it was a thing. Even the most nationalistic American rudimental purists have to agree that based on my previous evidence, that at least 33 of the 40 are super traditional and have been in American drumming for a long time, like 150 to 200 years at least. So they're not overtly Swiss, and they're not non-traditional. They were there and they were used. If you take these thin claims of sort of non-nationalism out of there, there's not really a good reason not to have at least 33 rudiments. And then for the other 7, whatever. I'm not 100% PAS follower. I'm not like worshiping at their feet. There are lots of rudiments that you could have put in there, and they didn't. So that's just 7 more that they picked, sort of at random. I think the multiple bounce roll makes sense. Okay. But like, for example, they could have picked the treble paradiddle instead of the triple paradiddle, which the sticking is different. It's the same length, but it's not really a paradiddle at all. It's totally different. And that would have been more traditional, more American. They wouldn't have had to invent anything. But is it better? I'm not sure if it is. There probably is, if you did enough research, a pedagogically perfect set of rudiments that would teach you all the basic strokes. It would introduce the rhythms and idioms of snare drumming that you're going to find out in actual literature. And it would be concise. It wouldn't be any more fluff than what teaches you exactly the skills that you need. However, no collection of rudiments that I've ever seen is perfect. There's basically a different set in almost every book from the 1700s, when we became a country, up to 1984. And then, of course, there's hybrids, so we've been changing them ever since, right? There's been like 40 years of hybrids. And so we've never been content with whatever set we had at any given time. And drumming keeps changing, so no set will ever be perfect forever for the current time period that you're in. If it's more than a few years old, it's probably something about it is antiquated. We can all kind of agree, though, that rudiments are useful and that they have a place in drumming education, and that, you know, knowing some and practicing them is helpful for your playing. It's just a straight up thing that's been proven true for hundreds and hundreds of years. However, I don't think it's possible to study too many, to spend too much time on them, to work on them more than is beneficial, right? That's just not possible. Like, you could always be better. There's always another rudiment out there to learn. And like, really squabbling over should there be 26, should there be 40, are there too many, are there not enough, is pointless, right? Any number of rudiments between, you know, 3 and 900, which I think there probably really are, is valuable, and you should consider it as a student or a teacher, as a master drummer or a beginner, as a valuable tool. If you disagree entirely on any of these points, let me know. But that's my take on the 26 versus the 40, and how American traditionalism and undue Swiss influence are not really a problem for at least 33 out of the 40. And really, any number of rudiments you can have is going to be good for you. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.